There's a question that keeps surfacing in analytics teams' retrospectives, in Slack threads at midnight, and in one on ones where the door is closed. What exactly is an analyst for anymore? Not because the analysts aren't doing valuable work, they are, but because the work that used to be uniquely theirs is getting easier for everyone else to do. Your stakeholder can ask an AI copilot a question in plain English and get a chart back. A product manager can drag and drop in a semantic layer without writing a line of SQL. The extraction layer, I can get you the data, is compressing fast. So here's the real question. If getting the data is no longer the hard part, what is? The answer is staring at every data team from inside their own Slack channels. It's the message that says, which dashboard should I use for churn? It's the board deck that has two different revenue numbers. It's the new hire who spends 3 weeks asking questions that nobody wrote down the answers to. The hard part is trust. The hard part is context. The hard part is knowing whether you can believe what you're looking at and having someone who takes responsibility for that. This guide makes a specific argument. The most durable, most valuable version of the analyst role isn't the person who queries the data. It's the person who makes data trustworthy. We're going to break down what that means in practice, what context curator and quality guardian actually look like as job functions, what skills they actually require, and why this isn't about adding busy work to an overloaded role. It's all about moving up the value chain to the place where AI can't follow you. We've watched teams go through this transition, some intentionally, some because of a painful incident that forced it. Now, the analysts who come out on the other side with more influence, not less, are the ones who stopped defining their value by the queries they write and started defining it by the trust they create. Most conversations about the analyst role stay abstract. This one gets specific about workflows, about authority structures, and about the tooling that makes the shift sustainable instead of exhausting. Let's start with an honest look at what the analyst role has been for the past 15 years, because understanding what's shifting requires understanding what was there in the first place. The traditional analyst value chain runs in a straight line: query, transform, visualize, present. Someone in the business has a question. The analyst knows where the data lives, how to extract it, how to clean it, and how to turn it into a chart or table that answers the question. For a long time, that was a genuine superpower. Data systems were hard to access. SQL was a specialized skill. BI tools were complex. The analyst was the bridge between raw data and business decisions. And that bridge is still standing. Analysts still do this work, and they do it well. But the moat around it is eroding. Text to SQL tools can now generate competent queries from natural language prompts. BI platforms have AI copilots that let a marketing manager build their own dashboard without filing a Jira ticket. Semantic layers, like those in dbt or Looker, let teams define metrics once and expose them through self-serve interfaces. None of these tools are perfect, but they don't have to be perfect to compress the demand for someone whose primary value is, I can write a query. Now, this isn't a story about analysts becoming irrelevant. It's a story about the floor of the role rising. The baseline work, pulling data, building straightforward dashboards, answering well-defined questions, is getting automated or democratized. What's left is everything above that floor. And what's above that floor turns out to be enormously valuable. It just hasn't had a name. Building on that picture of a role in transition, we need to understand what problem is growing even as the extraction problem shrinks. Because organizations didn't just invest in modern data stacks and declare victory. They invested in modern data stacks and created a new category of pain. The access problem, it's largely solved. Most companies with data teams have a warehouse, a transformation layer, and BI tools. People can get data. The problem is that they can't tell whether the data they got is right. This is the trust gap, and it shows up in specific, recognizable ways. A mid-sized SaaS company prepares for a board meeting and discovers that the finance team's ARR number is 2 million higher than the growth team's ARR number. Both teams are confident. Both can show their dashboards. The difference traces back to the definition change 3 years ago. One team's DBT model was updated to exclude trial subscriptions from active, and the other team's wasn't. Nobody documented the change. Nobody reconciled the models. Two definitions of the same metric have been quietly diverging for 3 years. That's a context failure, not a data engineering failure, not a pipeline failure, a failure of institutional knowledge. The kind of knowledge that answers, what does this number actually mean, and has the meaning changed? Or consider the proliferation problem. An enterprise data team has 1,200 Tableau dashboards. Fewer than 200 have been viewed in the past 90 days. Nobody knows which ones are canonical. New analysts join and copy the wrong one because it appeared first in search. Stakeholders get conflicting numbers and lose faith in the data team entirely. These aren't edge cases. They're the normal state of a mature data organization that solved for access but didn't solve for trust. And the person who feels this pain most acutely, the one who gets the Slack message at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of, why doesn't this number match, is the analyst. They're already doing the trust work. They're just doing it reactively, invisibly, and without a title that says it's their job. Now that we've established the trust gap, we can look at the first half of the role evolution, context curation. And the most important thing to say up front is that context curation is not a fancy name for writing descriptions in a wiki. Curation is an editorial function. A curator at a museum doesn't just label every painting. They decide which paintings go on the wall, how they're arranged, what interpretive context surrounds them, and when something should be moved to storage. A data context curator makes that same kind of decision. What institutional knowledge is most valuable to codify? Where should that knowledge live so people can actually find it? How do we keep it current as definitions evolve? And when should we actively retire context that's becoming misleading? Let's ground this in a specific workflow. Take the ARR reconciliation from a moment ago. An analyst investigates, traces the divergence to a DBT model change from 3 years back, and resolves the immediate conflict. That's traditional analyst work, and it's valuable, but the curator step is what happens next. The analyst creates a governed glossary entry for ARR. Not a paragraph in Confluence that nobody will find, a glossary entry in the data catalog in a tool like Atlan that's linked directly to the canonical DBT model and the BI dashboard that consumes it. The entry includes the definition and the rationale for the current calculation. When someone searches for ARR in the catalog, they don't get a list of 12 tables then. They get the governed definition, the certified source, and the context that prevents the next 3-year divergence. Now, scale that to practice. A growth stage company hires 3 analysts. Each one independently asks the same 15 questions in the first 2 weeks. What does this table mean? Why is there a version 2 suffix? Which dashboard should I use for churn? A senior analyst recognizes the pattern and spends a week documenting the top 20 most asked questions as README content on the corresponding data assets in the catalog. The next hire's onboarding drops from 3 weeks to 1. And the week after that, it's even faster because the documentation compounds. Each new question that gets answered and codified reduces the next person's ramp time. That's the curation dividend. It appreciates over time rather than depreciating. But here's the part most conversations about documentation actually miss. Curation also means deprecation. It means the curator looks at 5 stale definitions and retires 3 of them. It means marking an outdated column description as needing review rather than leaving it there to mislead. This is the editorial judgment that separates a curator from someone who's just filling in metadata fields. With the content curation established as the meaning layer, we can turn to the complementary function, quality guardianship. And the distinction matters because context and quality are solving different problems with different tools. Context curation answers, what does this data mean? Quality guardianship answers, can I rely on this data now? A product analytics team's activation dashboard shows a 40% drop in new user signups overnight. Stakeholders escalate. The analyst team investigates, not the pipeline itself, but the way the data looks to consumers. The root cause? An upstream engineering team renamed a column in the events table during a migration. The pipeline didn't break. It just started returning nulls where it used to return values. Technically, nothing eroded. Practically, every number built on that column has been silently wrong. The analyst does three things. First, they diagnose the issue. Traditional analysts work. Second, they create an announcement on the affected asset in the catalog, warning every consumer that numbers from the past 48 hours are unreliable. Third, and this is the guardian step, they set up a quality monitor through the catalog's integration with a tool like Monte Carlo. That way, the next time a column goes from populated to null, an alert fires before a stakeholder notices. That third step is the difference between an analyst who fixes a fire and a guardian who installs a smoke detector. But guardianship goes beyond monitoring. Consider the dashboard graveyard, that enterprise team with 1,200 Tableau dashboards. An analyst with guardian authority doesn't just flag the problem, they act on it. They use lineage to identify dashboards built on deprecated data sources. They check view counts to find dashboards nobody has opened in the last 6 months. They consult with nominal owners. And they then deprecate 600 dashboards in the catalog and add notices that redirect users to the certified alternatives. Here's the critical point. That analyst could only do this because they had authority, not just responsibility. The certification and deprecation workflows in a catalog like Atlan aren't just labels. They're governance mechanisms that change what other people see and can access. A guardian who can observe a problem but can't act on it isn't a guardian. They're a witness. The role only works when the organization grants the analyst the power to certify, to deprecate, to block a misleading dashboard from publication, and to escalate when an upstream team's change threatens downstream consumers. At this point, we need to address what a lot of analysts are thinking, though, because the most common reaction to you should become a context curator and quality guardian is, I was hired to do analysis, not to maintain a wiki. That objection is half right. If context curation means spending every Friday afternoon filling in description fields because someone put it on the team's OKRs, then yes, that's overhead, and analysts are right to resist it. The objection fails when curation and guardianship are treated as what they actually are, a different kind of analysis. When an analyst reconciles two conflicting metric definitions and creates a governed glossary entry, that's analytical work. They're analyzing the data ecosystem, the models, the transformations, the business logic, the historical context, and producing an artifact that prevents future errors. When a guardian sets up quality monitors based on the knowledge of which upstream changes are most likely to cause downstream problems, that's analytical judgment applied to reliability instead of reporting. The skill set isn't different. The object of analysis is. That said, the overloaded analyst problem is real and can't be hand-waved away. 3 structural changes have to be true for this evolution to work. First, tooling has to reduce the mechanical burden. This is where capabilities like AI-assisted metadata generation matter. A catalog like Atlan can auto-generate descriptions for 500 tables, and 85% of them will be good enough. The curator's job isn't to write all 500 descriptions from scratch. It's to review the 15% that are subtly wrong, like the churn date column that AI describes as the date the customer churned, when it's actually the date the churn prediction model scored the customer. AI handles volume. The human handles judgment. That's a manageable workload. Second, time allocation has to be explicit. If management expects analysts to take on curation and guardianship responsibilities, but doesn't reduce their reporting workload, the initiative fails. The teams that do this successfully carve out dedicated time, typically 20% of an analyst's week, for curation and quality work. That's not a tax on productivity. It's an investment in the reliability of everything else the team produces. Third, the role needs organizational recognition. Context curator and quality guardian can't be informal expectations bolted onto an unchanged job description. They need to show up in career ladders, in performance reviews, and in the way leadership talks about what the data team does. The analyst who prevents a $2 million metric discrepancy from reaching the board deserves the same recognition as the analyst who builds the board dashboard in the first place. Everything we've talked through converges on a career reality that's worth stating plainly. AI copilots are going to keep getting better at extracting data. Self serve tools are going to keep getting easier to use. The analyst whose primary value is, I can write this query, is standing on ground that's shrinking year by year. That's not pessimism, it's pattern recognition. But the analyst who owns context in quality occupies a fundamentally different position. They're the person who makes AI generated insights reliable because someone has to verify that AI pulled from the right metric definition, not the deprecated one. They're the person who makes self serve analytics safe because someone has to certify which dashboards are trustworthy before 500 people build on them. They're the person who ensures that when a CEO asks, can I trust this number? The answer is yes. And there's a name attached to that assurance. That's not a role that gets automated. That's a role that gets more valuable as automation increases. Because every new AI capability, every new self serve tool generates more data sets that need context and quality oversight. The shift from query runner to curator guardian isn't about learning a completely new set of skills. It's about pointing existing analytical skills, critical thinking, business acumen, attention to detail, communication at a higher leverage target. We've covered a lot of ground, from why the traditional analyst value chain is compressing, through the trust gap that creates the need for context curation and quality guardianship, to what those roles actually look like in practice and the structural conditions that make them sustainable. But knowing the argument is one thing. Actually pitching this evolution to your manager or your team is another. We'll link a companion piece below on how to scope a Curator Guardian pilot on your team, starting with a single domain and a 30-day experiment.